What are blood cancers? How are stem cells donated? And who do we need as donors? Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Dr. Mosam Tombene, and signing with us today is Trifosa Ntswelengwe. On Vital Signs, we'll focus on bone marrow and bone cancers. Now, bone marrow stem cell donations and Leukemia Awareness Month is observed every year from the 15th of August to the 15th of October. Now, the goal is to raise awareness and encourage people to donate bone marrow stem cells. Now, coming up on the program, we'll speak to a mother of a 7-year-old girl waiting for a bone marrow match, a recipient as well as a donor. We'll then speak to a hematologist about blood cancers and, of course, the causes, risk factors and the treatment options available. Lastly, we'll speak to the head of donor recruitment from the South African Bone Marrow Registry about their role and how to register as a bone marrow donor and who can donate. Remember that we want to hear from you. You can be part of the show by asking the guests that we'll have on any question that you may have on your mind. Share your view with us on what we're discussing. The number to call is 011-714-5861 or 011-714-5877. You can also share your thoughts with us on social media using Twitter at SABC Vital Signs or Facebook, and that is SABC Vital Signs. The show will continue right after this ad break. Welcome back to Vital Signs. Now, every year, thousands of South Africans of all ages and races are diagnosed with diseases such as leukemia, bone marrow failure, and some other rare blood disorders. Now, 75% of these patients are under the age of 25, and their only hope of survival is, of course, to have a stem cell transplant from donors who share the same tissue type as they do. Now, joining us is Gugu Mhlulisi, mother of 7-year-old Fanele Mamele, bone marrow patient waiting for a match. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ma, to really talk about this very important issue that a lot of people don't know about. So take us through your journey. How was Fanele as a child?
Sure, Fanele is a bubbly child. She's full of personality, very active, loves friends, loves playing, and really, really enjoys spending time at school. That's her as a child.
So let's talk through, you have this child that is seemingly normal, a healthy child that is playing around like other children, but something decides or something does change at some point that makes you raise an eyebrow to go and see a doctor about your child. Take us through that process.
So with Fanele's journey, it was a little bit different because she had a cancer, kidney cancer, when she was a child, when she was younger and 3 years old. So she routinely follows up with the hematologist. So her recent diagnosis was picked up with changes that showed up on her routine blood tests.
Now, to a family, this is, of course, something that's very stressful. From dealing with a child that already had a previous cancer, you think, you know, it can't get any worse. And now you get this diagnosis from follow-up. How did the family take all of this? It
was just devastating. Honestly, we completely blindsided, didn't expect such a turn in events. But yeah, since then, it's been an emotionally sort of tense time, just trying to get to grips with what's going on and a lot of hospital visits and all of that. But we're just trying to take it one day at a time. And yeah, it's been quite a journey.
How has Fanele's life changed, or what's Fanele's life like now that she has another diagnosis of a different kind of cancer?
The major change is just her missing out on a normal childhood. She started grade 1 earlier this year, but unfortunately had to stop in March when she was diagnosed because of the risk of infection. So that, you know, losing that sense of normalcy of being able to go to school and be with her friends, that's been a major blow. But also on the home front, she can't interact with friends, extended family as often as we'd like and as often as she used to, often in isolation. And moreover, she's also often in hospital, which is not the way that, you know, a childhood should happen.
So let's talk about this isolation. I think it's such a principle that a lot of people don't necessarily understand. I think the closest thing people have to it was lockdown, where if you live by yourself, you were by yourself for that 35 days and, you know, that was that. But it's a different kind of isolation for Ufanele. What does her isolation look like?
So her isolation just basically pertains to us minimizing the risk of her getting infection, any kind of infection, because any small infection can be potentially fatal with her because of the constant low blood counts. So we just stay at home with her. She's only mostly in the company of the immediate family, which is us that stay with her. And so that's the major part of the isolation. And also it means that she can't be with crowds, she can't attend children's parties, she can't go to the mall with us or whatever. So it also means that the family is also generally isolated. I mean, we also feel that we can't go out and enjoy, you know, what life offers without being able to take our daughter with. So generally now it means that the whole family is kind of in isolation.
Now, when you describe this, it seems like a process that has taken a long time, but is also going to take some time. What current issue are you dealing with respect to her treatment now?
So currently, she's started maintenance treatment, which is why she couldn't be part of the interview today. She's in hospital. She's waiting for her perfect match and hopefully a bone marrow transplant as soon as one is possible. But she's completed the intensive phase of chemotherapy, which is come as a relief because that was really intense for her. And so currently she's well. She's doing well on chemotherapy. And yeah, we're just continuing waiting in hope that we'll get a perfect match and be able to get a transplant for her.
Now, for a lot of people, when you talk about treatment, the idea is, I'm sick right now, the doctor's going to give me some tablets, I'm going to go home, and within 5 days, I'll be better. But for this kind of treatment that we're waiting for Ufanele, there's been quite some time. How long has the family been waiting for this perfect match?
So we were told she was diagnosed in March with acute myeloid leukemia, and we were told in April that she was one of the kids that would require a transplant for treatment. So the bone marrow registry activated a search from April. So we're now in the 4th month of waiting for our match.
And lastly, what does her life look like when the perfect match does come around? What will her life look like?
Sure. It's even hard to imagine, it will look, it's a second chance for her. She'll get a chance to have a normal childhood. She'll get to go back to school, which she's really, really, really looking forward to. She'll get to spend as much time as she can with extended family, her cousins, her friends. We'll all get to experience life with her. She'll get to experience adventures that she can't do at the moment. And I mean, we now have a new look on life and what is important. So we really can't wait for her transplant to happen so that we can be able to give her a meaningful life and spend quality time together.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about your experience with Ufanele. Of course, that it is Ugugu talking about her child and, of course, the struggles that they're dealing with finding that perfect match for the rare cancer that she has. We're going for a quick ad break. After that, we'll speak to the professor about what exactly blood cancers are. See you after this. Welcome back to Vital Signs. I'm Dr. Musam Tombeni. Now, over 900,000 people are diagnosed annually with blood cancers worldwide. However, many of these people remain unaware of these serious, incurable diseases, leaving blood cancers with very little public awareness. Now, joining us is Professor Nicholas Novitsky, a hematologist from the Blood Center in Rondebosch Medical Center. Thank you so much for joining us, Prof. I think an important question so that we're not confusing any viewers is this idea of what blood cancers are. Can you give us a brief description of what it is actually when we say someone has a cancer of the blood?
Good morning to everybody. Yes, thank you. So, like in most malignancies, what occurs is that one of the very early cells, we call them stem cells, goes wrong. The genetic coding much like is the coding that we have for programs. The genetic coding goes wrong for a number of reasons. Sometimes it's a mutation, sometimes it's an addition of certain genetic material in the wrong place, and that leads to a deregulation and an abnormal growth of these cells, which fail to mature. And the only thing that they do is divide, 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 and take over the bone marrow.
Okay, we seem to be having a poor connection with the prof. We'll get that re-established, but if you are just joining us, this is Vital Signs. I'm Dr. Musamtomene. Today we're talking about blood cancers and, of course, the importance of diagnosing these, the importance of going out to actually find these cancers, to educate the public about these cancers. And once you have been diagnosed with these cancers, what is actually done, you know, from the different treatment modalities, and eventually, if you are someone that would qualify to get bone marrow transplants, stem cell transplants, and of course treatment that would follow that. But no, also importantly, what we're talking about on the show today is the importance of the people that actually go out and treat and help in assisting treat these people by giving some of their marrow. And some of this marrow, of course, has a number of things. Could be stem cells, could be marrow that is just something in addition to what the person might not have. So there are a number of things that make today's topic so important to what we're discussing. And of course, this is the idea of these blood cancers. Now, the reason why we're discussing this is because between the 15th of August to the 15th of October is when we celebrate and, of course, commemorate and look forward to celebrating the need to help out people that have these deficiencies or have these malignancies that require people to donate blood. So we're going to continue this conversation, of course, with Professor Nicholas Novitsky, who is on the line now joining us. Prof, before you disconnected from us, we're talking about what these blood cancers are. We can pick up the discussion from this point onward.
Sure. So what I was trying to say is that there is a mutation, and therefore that leads to proliferation or growth of cells that unfortunately are useless from the functional point of view. And then the bone marrow that makes the blood starts failing. Patients don't have red cells, that means they feel very tired. As Google was saying, there's a risk of infection. And there is also a risk of bleeding. And unfortunately, because these cells circulate everywhere, they can also grow in other organs and cause organ damage. So generally speaking, if they are uncontrolled, they are not properly treated, they, unfortunately, the child or the adult patient dies with organ failure.
Now, a lot of the time... Yeah, sorry, Prof, continue.
So, fortunately, I was saying that we have very good treatment. These treatments lead to a patient to a remission, and they can lead practically a normal life, and with certain conditions, we have managed to achieve a technical cure of the disease with treatment. But if we want to ensure that there is a completely noble lifestyle and cure of the disease, basically there is an abnormal bone marrow that needs to be corrected, or in other words, replaced. And this is where bone marrow transplantation has a place.
All right, so let's talk around risk factors. Who is the person that needs to be on the lookout for potentially having these blood cancers? Now, a little bit earlier on in the show, I did mention that a lot of these people are under 25, but why are these cancers more prevalent and problematic in younger patients?
Well, the reality is that the risk factor for cancer is more with older patients, but clearly young patients draw our attention much more. So in children, acute leukemia is the most common malignancy, and in some of them, it's actually acquired in utero, but developed afterwards once a child is born. But they affect, unfortunately, people of all ages, but as you correctly say, it draws more our attention when they're young.
Now, the big thing that a lot of people will, speak out against or really want to highlight with regards to these cancers is the problems that they cause. But a lot of the people, and I think you've also alluded to this idea as well, this issue of diagnosis. So how do we make the diagnosis, and what should people look out for with themselves, people sitting at home that may potentially have these cancers and not know?
So they are fairly quickly growing, so that most patients will become symptomatic within a few weeks of things going wrong in the bone marrow. And typically, they will feel tired. They may see bruising in the skin, or they can develop recurrent infections. Some other patients, like that, it's not a leukemia, a common malignancy is multiple myeloma. They often develop other organ failure, like, for instance, kidney problems. But a common theme is recurrent infections.
Okay. So, Prof, I think an important thing as well is this idea of there being so many cancers that we know about, that we hear about, and see, of course, that are related to people having these blood sort of disorders. So let's talk around the idea of what's the most common of these blood cancers in South Africa.
So the most common, as I say, is multiple myeloma. It's a disease, again, of the immune system. And it's by far the most common malignancy in the bone marrow. Having said that, bone marrow malignancies are not that common like epithelial tumor, like solid tumors, breast, lung, and stomach, and colon. But indeed, the myeloma is the most common and usually affects the bones. And bone pain is a very common theme. There are in others, which are the lymphomas. They affect the lymph nodes. So between myelomas and lymphomas, you are covering basically 2/3 of all the cancers. A smaller group are the leukemias, the one that you mentioned earlier, and whose daughter has. So there are some others which are less common, but I think that these are the three groups that cover most of the malignancy.
All right. Well, we're going to continue this conversation, of course, after the break. And that is Prof, who is joining us today to really speak about what all these blood cancers are. Now, after the break, we'll speak to Peter Leroux, a bone marrow recipient, and we'll continue our discussion with Professor Nicholas Nowitzki, Haematologist, about the treatment options for these blood cancers. Stay with us. Welcome back to Vital Signs. I'm Dr. Mosamtombeni, and today we're talking about blood cancers. Do you know someone that has one? Do you know someone, that has gotten treatment before, a recipient, a donor? Well, that's who we're talking to today. And of course, we're here to inform you too. Now, it is an estimated that 4,000 new cases of blood disorders such as leukemias and lymphomas are reported in South Africa at any given time. Now, there are 200 patients awaiting a bone marrow stem cell transplant without a suitable donor match. And their chances of survival are slim without one. Now, we're here to speak to Peter Leroux, who is a bone marrow recipient, and he shares his journey with us on how he found his donor match. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Dr. Mr. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So let's jump into it. Here you are, you've just received a diagnosis of some sort, and you're being told all kinds of things. Take us through that time in your life.
It's a very difficult time, and it's very overwhelming because very few of us are actually aware of what this is. So I'll never forget it. I was in a hospital room and a doctor came in, and in a wonderful, wonderful way she said, you've got a T-cell acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Jeez. And that is just, what does this mean? What is this? And I'll never forget it. In the most respectful way, she said, let's quickly have the difficult talk. I can't give you 24 hours to go and think about this. I need to start treatment now, or else you will not be alive in 20 days. And definitely, once your treatment is finished, we do have to look at a bone marrow transplant. That is an absolute given.
So harsh truths from the very beginning were what you were I guess, greeted to when you got this diagnosis. But what led you to go to hospital? What were some of the symptoms that you were experiencing at home? What was happening in your life for you to think maybe something's not right?
Two predominant things. I was pale as a wall. You could literally see through me. And the other thing was extreme fatigue.
Okay.
It was a fatigue that you cannot describe to anyone. You stand in the shower, and beyond a minute, you just have to get out and sit down again because you can't stand.
So you've got these symptoms, you get to the hospital, you get this very scary diagnosis, you're told treatment needs to start immediately, and you go through the first phases of the treatment, but you're given this big red flag that's put out to you to say at the end of this treatment you're going to need something. You're going to need this bone marrow transplant. What do you think a bone marrow transplant was at the time?
At that point in time, I didn't have a cooking clue what this was, because I think I always say, you know, it's just like a Boeing. It's like a plane that you see in the sky. You hear something about it, but it goes by very quickly. But when you are faced with it, it is actually standing next to that Boeing and see that this is a big thing. It is a huge thing. And generally, there are two types of bone marrow transplants, where you can get your own cells or where you need someone else's cells because your cells can't be used. And those are the two general ones that you get.
So here you are, the treatment's about to be started, but I'm sure even in the 20 days that you're going through the other treatments with, this big thing of who is going to donate this marrow to me starts coming about. You know, where do you get it? Who do you speak to? Who's going to source this? The process of finding a donor, were you involved in any way, or is this all hospital-based and you were just hoping for someone to come and assist you?
Again, like at the very beginning, it's very overwhelming, and you kind of like feel the responsibility. Do I now need to get someone? Do I need to find someone? And this is where the work, like, for example, organizations like the SABC comes in, and which is absolutely amazing. Because once this process...
So who's the SABC?
South African Bone Marrow Registry.
Yes.
So the moment when this starts, this whole machinery and process starts, when you need to get someone else's cells because they can't use your own cells. First of all, they look at your direct family, your immediate family, whether or not there's a match. Then nationally, is there maybe someone on the national databases? And if there's no one on the national databases, that is when they start looking internationally.
Sure.
I was fortunate to get an international donor because there wasn't someone in South Africa. And I really think that is why it's so important to have this discussion today, because we need to register on this registry.
So I think you saying that brings about a very eye-raising sort of sentiment, right? Where we live in a country that has 60 million people, and you had to go get an international donor for you to get your transplant. But that seems highly unlikely that there are 59-point-something million people that don't have a match for you. What do you think contributes to you having to get an international donor?
I think one of the things is that there's a huge misperception about what a bone marrow transplant is.
Okay.
The moment when you start talking to people about it, they ask, is this invasive thing where they're going to take out my bone marrow, where I'm going to lose my bone marrow, where it's actually, it's a simpler procedure than something very invasive. And we need to educate people about what this is. Once you register to become a donor, it's the easiest thing on earth. You just take a swab in your mouth so that we can look at your DNA, so that you can go on the registry. And the most important thing is, when you are a donor, you are a life giver. This is a life-giving procedure. If I may say something, whenever we talk about transplants, I tell people, whoever I talk to, let's give it another name. Don't call it a transplant. Call it what you would like to call it. Mine was New Beginnings.
Okay.
I called it New Beginning because that is what it is. One lady called it her reset button. Another one called it my new chapter. There's a reason why we do these things. And if you are a donor, you are saving someone's life.
Sure. It's crazy, right? That, off a simple donation or life-giving or reset participation, you're able to change someone's life. So the day comes and you're about to receive your donation. Take us through that day.
It was actually a very special day. My mother and my grandmother could be there. They were there the day that I received it. And it's actually, again, it's a very complex thing, but it's actually a simple procedure. You get hooked up to your stem cells and they flow in. And I remember my grandmother's quite a talkative person. But it takes about 20 to 30 minutes for the stem cells to flow in. And during that time, she was just quiet.
Sure.
She didn't say a word. And afterwards, I asked her, Grandmother, why were you so quiet? And she said, every little drop that fell in, I said, welcome, welcome.
Oh,
Please
no,
go
no.
do your job. Please go do your job. And again, that is why we do the stem cell transplants, because there's hope. It's new life flowing inside of you. It's the cells that flow to where they need to go, and there they grow.
Thank you so much, Peter, for talking about this new life that you experienced and allowing your story to put hope in not just the recipients that could potentially receive these transplants, but for those that would like to donate or are inspired today to donate. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, there are a range of different treatments, of course, that are available for blood cancers, and treatments of these, of course, require a lot of things. Now, doctors recommend what they want to recommend depending on the type of the cancer that you have and, of course, your health status at the time. Now, we'll continue our discussion with Professor Nicholas Nowitzki, hematologist, as we look at treatment options for these blood cancers. Now, Prof, thank you so much for joining us once again. These bone marrow transplants and, of course, stem cell transplants sound like two different things. Is there similarity between the two, or are these completely different ideas? Professor?
So the different cancers are present differently. So lymphomas may present with enlarged glands. Leukemias may present much like what we heard, tiredness and shortness of breath, being pale, having various bruises. Myelomas can present with bone pain mainly. So the important thing is to be aware that something is wrong and go to your doctor. Your GP will first station, will do the initial test, and we'll see that there is something wrong. And indeed, follow it up afterwards with more specialized testing, which will lead to a diagnosis, yes.
Now, we've spoken a lot to this idea of bone marrow today. Can you explain what bone marrow is and what a transplant of bone marrow and a transplant of stem cells would look like?
So a bone marrow is the contour or inside the bones. So usually the axial bones, so that means the bones in the ribs, in the vertebrae, in the pelvis, are the ones that contain that red matter, which is the early precursors and stem cells which live in specialized niches. So these stem cells will eventually differentiate into the blood elements that we see, and for instance, we donate at the blood banks, other red cells, white cells, and platelets. So we're interested about stem cells, which can circulate in the blood in low numbers, but one can increase the number of stem cells in the blood by using growth factors.
Okay.
So these are hormones that lead to release of stem cells that are usually hidden in the bone marrow and go into the blood, and they can be collected with special machines called apheresis or cell apheresis machines. They collect them, they concentrate them, so we process anything between 20 and 30 liters of blood, that means recirculate the blood through these machines. And from those 20 or so liters of blood, we are able to obtain a graft of approximately 300 mils to 400 mils, all containing very enriched of the stem cells. And in some hospitals, they purify them more. Others, they use them as they are. They are infused intravenously, and they find, once they are in the living body, they find their way into the bone marrow and repopulate this bone marrow. But there is a period of about 2 to 3 weeks until there is engraftment. where there is high risk of infection. So it's a very specialized field, of course.
Now, to what we're speaking about today, this idea of bone marrow, surely is just the best treatment for certain types of cancers. So where and what cancers would bone marrow and stem cell transplant be beneficial versus other cancers that require other types of either chemotherapy or additional medication?
So as we're learning more and more about the biology of cancers, we're learning also how to correct the defects. For instance, chronic myelogenous leukemia used to be the most common malignancy where we would use transplantation. But we've learned about this malignancy, where the mutation is, and now there is a tablet that is able to correct this problem. And basically, we don't use transplantation in these patients except for occasional resistant cases. This time, we are going to learn about these molecular defects in all these diseases, and it's likely that we will be able to correct them as well. But what often happens is that stem cells live in niches. They are highly protected from medication, and that's why they can recur. And usually when there is a recurrence of a malignancy is where we recommend that they should receive a stem cell transplant, because they indeed have a irreversible defect. So because of that, we put a new bone marrow or new stem cells that will repopulate and make a new blood volume. And provided that we are able to sort out the immunological differences between donor and recipient, eventually there is full engraftment. And most patients do enjoy a normal quality of life.
Now, normal quality of life is something that a lot of people would want, and obviously what we strive for. But what does life look like for patients that have leukemias, lymphomas, and things such as that, that are on treatment, are now done, and are in remission? Is there a normal life that they can expect?
So it depends on which disease we're talking. For instance, Hodgkin lymphoma can be cured with standard chemotherapy. And in children, pediatric acute leukemia also can be cured in most cases. So it's when there is a disease recurrence, when the transplantation becomes a long-term option. So some of the other leukemias, like a T-cell leukemia, and the gentleman that spoke earlier, it's a more difficult one to treat with just chemotherapy. And we recommend a stem cell transplant due to the high risk of recurrence. And usually in first remission, the outcome is superior to transplant. In more advanced disease, puts again into a remission. So it all depends which disease we're talking about, the risk factors of the patient, the comorbidities that the patient may have. Also, the biology of the malignancy. We have learned to look for genetic markers which make the disease more aggressive or less aggressive. And we can select then and recommend that the patient should perhaps have first chemotherapy and then follow up the patient. Oh no, you have a more aggressive malignancy, and we recommend that you should first receive transplant in your first remission.
Well, Prof, thank you so much for joining us today to outline the importance of what we're talking about today, of course, looking at blood cancers and the treatment. That was Professor Nicholas Nowitzki, a hematologist. After the break, we'll speak to Umfundo Ngwenya, a bone marrow donor, and then speak to Nadia Chokli, the head of donor recruitment from the South African Bone Marrow Registry. Stay with us. Welcome welcome back to Vital Signs. Now, there are around a 30% chance that you may have a sibling that is a bone marrow match for you, meaning that there is a 70% chance that someone else is going to need to give you the donation in order for you to get the transplant that you need when you have these leukemias and, of course, other blood cancers too. Now, we speak to Mfundo Ngwenya, who is also part of the journey of assisting someone. He is a bone marrow donor. Good day, Mfundo. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good day, Doc, and good day to your audience.
Lovely. So let's jump into this discussion. I mean, being a donor is such a weird thing because South Africans, by virtue of being South Africans, do not donate much in terms of blood, in terms of, organs, in terms of bone marrow. So what made you make this decision to go out and be a donor?
My story is simple. I grew up in a large family. I'm the only child from my mom and dad, but I grew up in a large family where my grandmother used to take care of other people. So it's something which came naturally when I was asked to donate. It's something I didn't really have to think about it because you always want to give. You have that mentality of giving and caring. So when I was approached to donate, it just came naturally. I didn't even think about it until recently when people are starting to ask me questions about it. And I'm like, I'm trying to find the right answer. But just looking at my family line and how they used to give, how we used to have people who are orphans, which used to stay with my grandmother, how she used to take care of other people, and how my mom did, how she used to buy other people clothes before buying for me. So yeah, I think it's because of that.
Now, the spirit of giving that you were nurtured into having is something that a lot of people might not necessarily have, but you have mentioned that someone approached you to tell you about this. So can you take us through the process of you being informed about what bone marrow donation was all about?
I was, it was way back in 2012. I was at a show where I think I was it was my gap year, I was doing coaching, when one of the ladies from Sunflower Organization was at Pick and Pay and asked me if would I be interested, and they just took a mouth swab, and then they said they're going to contact me once they found a perfect match. Yeah, it was pretty simple and easy and fast.
Now, the process between you registering on the day, them taking a swab and putting you on a registry, and then you getting the call to say, hey, Mfundo, we've got someone that may need your type of stem cells or your type of bone marrow. How long was that period, and how did you prepare for that day?
Funny enough, I was called after 8 or 9 years. It was in Pretoria. I was in Pretoria for the Varsity Shield Games. I'm involved with one of the teams there, and I received a call. I was still that side. And then when I flew back to Durban, I went for the test. I think I did about 13 tests or so, blood test. From there, I think we waited. We were going to have it in May or June, and then the patient got sick again. She had to go through the process again, chemo process, and then I think we were able to do it in December. So it takes longer, and it just needs to be patient. There's a lot of tests which need to be done. You need to go to the doctor. The doctor needs to check if you are fit enough to donate. And before you start donating, a week before, you just need to go through the process of needling. So they actually teach you how to inject yourself and stuff. It can be crazy to think about it, you injecting yourself, but you get used to it. And I would suggest to not train during that week, because I tried training and then I had a hectic training session. Yeah.
Well, look, it seems like this process for you was not one that was very difficult. I mean, the long time between you registering and the time that you would need it was there. And the fact that you went out and continued to do it, I think the person whose life you assisted in keeping is really, really grateful for that. And we really are grateful for you. And of course, would like a message, for the people that are at home, that are potential donors and just aren't doing it. What would you say to encourage them to go out and donate?
I think it's more based on what our family thinks or our beliefs. Actually, donating, it's simple, it's easy. It doesn't take much from you because you only need a day to just sit there and donate. And then it's simple. It takes about 6 to 8, if I'm not mistaken. and you're actually saving a life. And try, if you feel that your family do not believe in you donating, speak to them. It's easy because we as African, we believe in ubuntu, which means it's giving. You're giving back to someone. Even if you don't know them, you're not going to get a reward, you're not going to get money. Don't expect money. Let's start there. Because a lot of people expect to be given money for whatever work they do. So just give from the heart. Maybe one day God will reward you for giving back to that person, yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Mfundo Ngwenya, for your story. Mfundo, of course, being a donor who himself registered and then got called to go out and assist someone with his bone marrow donation. Now, thousands of people with blood cancers, disease and disorders reach a critical point where only possible cure that they can find for their condition is a transplant. Now, most patients do not have a compatible family donor, and that's when the South African Bone Marrow Registry lends a helping hand. Joining us from South African Bone Marrow Registry is Nadia Chokli, the head of donor recruitment. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let's talk about what your organization does and how easy is it for someone to register and could potentially get called up later on in life.
Thank you, and good morning to the viewers as well. It's not nearly as invasive and scary as the general public would think. And I think the first question we normally get before any other is, what is the cost involved? And the great news is it is completely free to apply. There's absolutely no cost involved at any part of the process. And even if you reach Mfundo's stage where you're donating, we would fully reimburse you for all your expenses. So I think essentially as an NGO, being very cost conscious, but also very patient and donor centric, we understand that many South Africans have had it tough the last 2 or 3 years. But we are in desperate need. There are many patients from various ethnic groupings that are in desperate need of a transplantation. And for this reason, we visit all corners of South Africa trying to recruit donors like Mfundo for patients like Fanele. And it is just an absolute pleasure. Our entire team, we absolutely love doing what we do because we're essentially recruiting donors and lifesavers.
Now, what are some of the misconceptions that you have to deal with respect to donation of bone marrow? But I guess this could be expanded across the board to organs in general. What are some of the big misconceptions that exist?
I certainly think the level of pain experienced and whether we're drilling into any body part, which is definitely a myth. There's absolutely no drilling, we can reassure you. The peripheral blood stem cell collection is very similar to a blood donation. So I think it starts with a conversation with the entity you're interested in donating to, whether it's the South African Bone Marrow Registry for bone marrow, whether it's the tissue bank or just donating blood or organs. Start by having a conversation with the individuals at the entity to get the real facts and get the information. Then try your best to apply or get involved somehow. Sometimes becoming a volunteer or just getting involved in some of the events actually teaches you more about the organization than anything else. So we do often encourage individuals that are either not eligible to sign up or feel this is not right for them, to become donors at that point in time, to become volunteers. Because you can recruit 10 or 15 or 100 additional potential donors that are eligible through drives throughout South Africa. And we do often collaborate with universities, schools, corporate companies, individual and private public events to host donor recruitment drives where we can actually go and sign up new donors, swab them there and then, and get them onto the registry ASAP.
Now, let's talk about this criteria that you'd need to fit in order to be able to donate. Is it an extensive one, or who can donate and who can't donate?
It's actually straightforward. You have to be between the age of 16 to 45. We have noticed that it yields a better outcome for the patient if the donor is younger. And then from there, not have any major blood disorders. So there are many conditions and types of medication that you can take that would still allow you to be eligible. You can, for example, be a smoker. You may, for example, be on antidepressants. There's a limit though, and there are some conditions that we do need to carefully consider. But for this reason, we have a comprehensive online and offline application form. It literally takes a few minutes to submit the form. Once our team has reviewed it, and if you're eligible, we then courier the cheek swab to any location in South Africa. We would either courier it or make arrangements for you to visit one of our medical depots where some of the nursing staff will help you with the cheek swab. And the kit is then returned to us. So the process itself, either at a drive or online, is relatively quick and painless to apply. And the system guides you through some of the criteria. But this is also available on our website, and our friendly staff would always guide you through any medical questions you want to discuss with them in private.
Now, a lot of the time people will have this idea that if I go out and I donate my stem cells or donate my bone marrow, won't I be missing the same thing that I'm donating? So they will play with this idea that, you know, it's like a kidney. If I give my kidney away, I can never get it back. Is this the same thing?
So the idea is with bone marrow donation is that your life would continue as normal and you're not deceased at the point where you're donating. Fortunately for us, our bodies make millions of new cells every day. And during the conditioning regimen prior to the donation, we administer a growth factor that will allow your body to overstimulate cell production so much so that it is pushed into your circulating bloodstream. So we are actually taking the excess we have encouraged your body to make. And the minute you stop doing the donation, your body just continues generating additional stem cells. So no, you won't be missing or losing anything. And the great news is we take super good care of our donors throughout the entire process. They're accompanied by wellness officers, trained medical staff. The facilities are really very, very well equipped and skilled to deal and you know, encourage our donors throughout the process, because we do understand that they get a bit nervous. But in the end, like Mfundo, they come on board, they share their journey, and we see that it encourages other individuals to apply because it is not as scary and invasive as people think it is.
Now, lastly, Nadia, before we go off, why are we, or should we, encourage people of color to donate?
Ethnicity plays a very important role, and currently our registry is very Caucasian heavy, which is also an international trend. Now, in South Africa, the majority of our population and elsewhere in Africa is of African descent. So it then makes sense that we need to diversify our registry as much as possible. And also because your DNA is inherited, it is most likely that you'll find in the same demographic pool that the donor and the patient would match. So we really are trying to increase the number of mixed ethnic and African donors in particular, because we currently have about 27 to 33% donors of color, of mixed ethnicity on our database, which is pretty much an international standard as well. But we really need to increase that if we want to service all the patients in South Africa. And I think the question isn't as much if I would be willing to do this for a stranger if they needed it. The question really is if a stranger would step up and do this for me if I needed it. And I think it really speaks to South Africans, our citizenry, our love for one another, and the fact that here we really all need to pull together to make this work and to save lives.
Thank you so much, Nadia, for joining us today to highlight the importance of this bone marrow registry and, of course, going out to register and potentially donating. We need more of you. Yes, you at home sitting watching this, go out, contact them and make your way to their facilities to get yourself registered so that you can help someone else one day. Thank you so much to all the guests that participated in today's show as we highlighted the importance of these bone cancers and, of course, bone marrow bone marrow donation that goes with it. I'm Dr. Musamtomene. This is Vital Signs. I'll see you again soon.